brutality is a further indication that the police force of this city is lacking in discipline and proper supervision. The police force in this city is being used as a political tool by politicians.
I think we have to keep making those links. I think it is very important, and what I see the gay community doing now in terms of its organization is that it is helping people to make those links. It really is about human rights in a very fundamental level. It's saying to people that you cannot expect individuals to exist in some kind of half-free state. The only time I think anybody ever tried to do that very seriously were the Americans after the abolition of slavery, in which you had certain rights and you didn't have other rights. And it doesn't work. It's crazy. And what we have to do is to get not simply politicians, not simply school board people, but the entire society making that kind of analysis.
Good evening, comrades. Good evening. I'm from the trade union movement, and there's a tendency for us to address each other's brothers and sisters. But you know the obvious problem with that. I see it as the imperialism of the two genders. But when I say comrade, it's universal. So that's for a reason why I addressed you as comrades. Not that I think you're a communist, not that there's not that there's any reason to fear communism in capitalist Canada, but that's how I prefer to address my comrades. I'm very happy to be invited to address this forum. It is very important for us as people who are oppressed to commemorate our events, our acts of resistance, for us to highlight the work of significant revolutionaries, because when we affirm our struggles, we remind each other of where we're coming from. We use the past as guide. We draw lessons from the past. Because if we are committed to revolution, and that's not a bad word, because we're talking about fundamental change in society, we must draw lessons from the past. Absolutely. And the focus of my presentation is the question of solidarity between oppressed peoples. And when we talk about solidarity, we're talking about a complicated thing, because once we start to work together, there will be conflict. There will be complicated, there will be challenges between us. And as such, I would like to raise questions about how do we do solidarity? How do we do solidarity around police violence? Some members of society, even oppressed people, may take the position that the police is necessary, that the police can be our friends. But if you are oppressed, the police is no friend of yours. They're literally enemies. Because if you're hungry in Toronto and you decide to go and liberate food from the stores, you would realize how quickly the police isn't their friend. If you're a worker and you decide you're going to take over your workplace and run it as a democratic enterprise of the workers, and you share equitably in the returns, you will quickly realize that the police are not your friend. So it should be very clear to those of us who are committed to fundamental social change that the police represent the dominant class in society, the dominant social groups, not those of us who would be Fanon's wretched of the earth. So I'd like to get that out of the way for you to realize the perspective that I come from when I deal with policing. But we must ask ourselves this question. Why is it that it was not until February the 20th, 1981, that the LGBTQ community recognized that police violence is taking place is taking place in the city of Toronto against the minorities. Why? In August 1978, an African man called Bawdy Evans was killed by the police. A year later, in August 1979, Albert Johnson was killed. And the question that we say is, where was the solidarity? Because at the same time, the police was being violent against gay men, against members of the LGBT community, and also, I should say, even within the African community. In, I think it was 1974, there was a raid of the barracks steam house. But again, even Africans, we didn't respond. Where was the solidarity? So by the time it reached 1981, or the 5th of February 1981, and when the bathhouses were raided, there was no solidarity. We didn't build relations between the two communities. Surely, there were individuals who decided that they're going to show solidarity, but there wasn't movement to movement or organization to organization solidarity in fighting police violence. We should have made common cause. But why not? Because in the African community, we have queer members in the African community, but when we organize around police violence, we don't look specifically at police violence against queer members of the African community. Then you look inside the queer community, and where are the voices dealing with violence against Africans? Because of course, in the queer community, they're Africans. How is it that we don't look at these intersecting realities and speak out whenever oppression is taking place? And I should say, we shouldn't fight oppression because we're going to somehow benefit from it. We should fight against oppression because it's the right thing to do. And in that spirit, just bear with me, I'd like to read a quote from Frantz Fanon. This is how it goes. Anti-Semitism hits me head on. I'm enraged. I'm bled white by an appalling battle. I'm deprived of the possibility of being a man. I cannot disassociate myself from the future that is proposed for my brother. Every one of my acts commit me as a man. And every one of my silences, every one of my cowardices reveal me as a man. We do not have to benefit from resistance for us to commit ourselves. But I'd like to quote Audre Lorde here, and let's start looking at the question of differences. It is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. That's the fundamental issue. How do we recognize our differences, and how do we build the basis for principled unity? I generally like to say that I'm a man of very few words, and so I'm going to cut out some of the things that I was going to speak to, and then we can have those, then I can respond to some of these things in the discussion. What was admirable, I would say, and to a certain extent, about the February 20th, 1981 rally at Queen's Park, is that it was explicitly committed to pulling what the organizers considered the minorities together. This was what the flyer of that of the 20th had to say in trying to rally different groups who experience police violence. Where is it? Okay. It says, now is the time to unite with minority communities. And now is the time it's making an appeal to the queer community. Now is the time to unite with minority communities to call for an end to police harassment. It shouldn't have taken the Bathhouse raids for that realization to take place, but nonetheless, it happened. But that in itself can be problematic if you're trying to build alliance with the African community, because the community may perceive that as very opportunistic. And when I mentioned earlier that we need to learn from the past, are we making the same mistakes today? Are we? If we say, and just another case I'd like to cite. After 9/11, you had Muslim communities, Muslim community, South Asian community, the Arab community in the United States and in Canada discovered racial profiling. All the time, Africans were organizing, they were at the front line fighting against police violence. But for the most part, these communities were silent. But after 9/11, somehow racial profiling was discovered. We do not build principled unity on that basis, but we still must build it, even if our partners are not doing right. Because we cannot win a fundamental change without the unity of the oppressed, but it must be principled unity. We cannot build unity if we don't speak plainly about the challenges in building an alliance or building coalition. Because that'd be hypocritical, and what we'll do is that when we're in our little tribes, we'll be very forthcoming about the problems. But when we sit with each other, we politely dance around the challenges, but we're already talking about it in our own little, in groups. So that is something that we shouldn't allow to happen. But guess what? I believe it's happening. When the organizers on the 20th decided that now is the time to build unity, they constantly refer to the minority. And guess who's the minorities? But guess who it represents the quintessential minority when you want to legitimize your oppression in North America? Oh. Comrades, I can't hear you. African people. Any group in North America would like to legitimize their oppression, they said we're like the niggers. And it's literally true. Woman is the nigger of the world. So it means African women are not women. They're blacks. They're Africans. White niggers in America, talking about Quebec. So to legitimize the struggle for independence among Quebecois, they have to reference African oppression in order to legitimize their oppression. But was there solidarity between the independence force in Quebec with Africans who are living there, right in their midst? How did they treat Africans there? But yet opportunistically reference the struggle of African people. And that's not just the past, when John Lennon talking about women as the nigger of the world. Because even a slut march, I think 2 years ago, I saw a placard saying the same thing. Women are the niggers, and I'm thinking, where are the African women? They're also women. Today, when we say that queer or gay is the new black, are we saying that Africans are still not part of the queer community? Are we marginalized members of the queer community? Are we second-class citizens inside the queer community? Because how could it be? Queer or gay is the new black. We must do better than that. We must change the way we approach the struggle. Today in Toronto, the leading force against police violence in terms of mobilizing is Black Lives Matter Toronto. In that struggle, we see some principled sisters, queer brothers, who are at the forefront of the struggle, similar to what we're seeing in the United States. How are we, how is the queer community responding to that movement? Are we demonstrating solidarity with the movement? Where are our organizations? There was solidarity in terms of being the marshal at, I think it was last year's Gay Pride event. But was that symbolic? Are symbols enough for the revolution that we'd want inside Canada, inside North America, across the world? How do we build concrete solidarity? And I'm saying this because I'm fundamentally committed to change in Canadian society. Not pocket change. Fundamental change. I mean to change all power relations. And I say that as an anarchist communist, I should probably I should probably reveal that, because a lot of times when we think of anarchists, we think of some white guys that are part of it. But they're Africans who proudly proclaim ourselves to be committed to the path of anarchism or march under the banner of anarchism. So where do we go from here? I think it's fundamentally necessary within the African community for us to understand, and I'm talking straight Africans, the oppression of queers across the color line, gender, and other markers of identity. We have to do our own work, and we have to represent that in how we organize. Also in the queer community, which is a diverse community, the understanding of white supremacy, especially among white comrades who are queer. It cannot be at the surface level that you understand white supremacy. You have to understand that in a fundamental way, how it works, how it shows up, organizing. And you all remember the Blacko incident around gay pride. So we have a lot of work to do in the community. And the same thing in the African community. We're still not where we need to be in terms of the mainstream organizing that's going on. I mean mainstream among even radicals and revolutionaries. So it's not just looking at one group and say, well, you're not measuring up. We're all not measuring up. And we cannot move forward if we don't measure up to the level that we can fight collectively against this oppressive order. So education is a critical part of it. But we also, especially around police violence, we need to build formal alliances so that when one group is attacked, all of us are attacked, and we have a mechanism to immediately address the problem and challenge police violence. And this is something we're doing on an ongoing basis because the police carry out their terroristic work 24/7. We need to stop fighting them in an episodic way and fight them on a day-to-day basis. There's no other way. And it's for that reason why we have to move away from mobilizing to organizing, because when organizing, we must become members of organizations in order to prosecute the struggle. We do not just mobilize, police kill someone, police beat someone, and we rally in the street. But then we wait until the next time we come out and we mobilize again. But you're organizing, you're a member of an organization, carrying out programs, even when the media is not there. So we need formal coalitions and alliances, and we'll go beyond police violence. There are other issues that we need to work together on, especially around class issues. Because the way we approach identity politics, the identity that we're afraid to proudly wave the flag on is the issue of class. The issue of class, we do not, when we think of identity politics, we do not even think about class as an identity, even though the majority of us in Canada constitute a part of the working class. Okay, but like with with some of my students, when we talk about class in the classroom, they're like, oh, we're the middle class. One student last year was teaching this anti-oppression diversity course, and he was saying, no, it's a part of the middle class. And I said, go home and talk to your mom. And his mom said, no, we're working class. And he said, but when I grew up in 3 different recreational programs, and she said, well, sometimes I didn't pay the light bill. So that allow you there. So class is something that we need to put into it, and I can elaborate on that in the Q&A. And thank you, comrades. I'm happy to be here, and I hope we will have a very vigorous discussion after this.